The 20th century ethicist and pastor Reinhold Niebuhr once wrote a slim volume called The Children of Light and the Children of Darkness, a vindication of democracy and a critique of its traditional defenders. In it, he reflects on this commandment of Jesus to his disciples, who said, "Be wise as serpents and innocent as doves." He also offers this bit of cogent analysis. Humanity's capacity for justice makes democracy possible, but humanity's inclination to injustice makes democracy necessary.
Will you pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts bear witness to your love, O God, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. First semester of my senior year of college, I took a course that was only offered every 4 years. The first class in which I ever took an incomplete. Not the last class, though, but this one wasn't even my fault. Presidency and the media had us reading about presidential biographers and a ton of op-eds, but mostly we followed the Gore versus Bush election cycle under the tutelage of an editor at Time magazine. The semester ended in early December, but no one could write a final paper because the election hadn't been decided yet. I'd been furious for most of the course. I was simultaneously writing my thesis on Christian responses to the '96 welfare reform bill and listening to the Bush campaign reiterate all the tired arguments of compassionate conservatism and the myth that all people living in poverty needed was some personal transformation. I was furious. Because in the first presidential election I'd been old enough to vote in, there were a million false equivalencies and terrible stereotypes. Would you vote for the nerd or the cowboy? Which daddy's boy was more likable? I was furious at my professor. Ostensibly a journalist, shouldn't he have known better than to just joke about the minutiae of hanging chads? Shouldn't he have been encouraging us to dig deeper into what was really going on? We didn't need to make fun of Katherine Harris's terrible makeup. Or was it hair? I don't remember. We could rage against the injustice that was being worked through her office. I didn't deserve to claim disenfranchisement, and wouldn't, especially not when I later learned of the tens of thousands of Black Floridians who were barred from voting or had their votes destroyed. But I felt, as perhaps many of you did, powerless and disillusioned and afraid. What are you supposed to do when injustice is so entrenched? A few years later, I broke up with a boyfriend who denigrated my decision to board a motor coach to D.C. with other church members to protest the impending war in Iraq. What good will that do? What can protests do? And of course, the protests didn't do anything, or rather, they didn't change the reality that a few weeks later, bombs from the United States lit up and began to decimate Iraq. But it still felt important to go, to march in D.C. and later through the streets of Chicago. It feels important to march. One of my favorite poems is also one of the saddest that I know. I suggest it for funerals and memorials and use it on Good Friday. Dirge Without Music by Edna St. Vincent Millay proclaims the narrator's grief on the death of a loved one. Down, down, down into the darkness of the grave. Gently they go, the beautiful, the tender, the kind. Quietly they go, the intelligent, the witty, the brave. I know, but I do not approve, and I am not resigned. Marching felt like a way of giving voice to our corporate disapproval, our commitment to refuse resignation. It's not enough, it's not sufficient, but it's something. Now, the story of Esther is full of systemic injustice and symbolic action. of power structures and real moral courage. It's a story of deep religious significance, though the name of God, the name of the divine, is never mentioned. Do you know this story? The basis for the Jewish festival of Purim, it's a dramatic narrative. The story takes place in the exilic period. The Jewish people had already been deported to Babylon, but by the time our story opens, Babylon had been conquered by the Persians, and even more Jews were living in the diaspora in the Persian capital. Xerxes is king, and he has been hosting a 6-month-long festival for his friends. As those 6 months come to a close, he commands his queen, Vashti, to come and dance before the court. He wishes to display her beauty a commodity, her obedience a sign of his authority. But she refuses. She will not come. She will not dance. Xerxes is offended and angry and goading into divorcing, at the very least, her in order to set an example to other wives throughout the empire. A young Jewish woman, Esther, lives in the capital with her uncle Mordecai. She is presented as one of the more beautiful in the kingdom, and eventually she is chosen from among the 100 in the royal harem to bear the diadem of the queen. All the while she has kept her identity from her husband and the court, practicing her faith in secret. Mordecai checks in on her regularly as a figure in the court, and one day on the castle grounds overhears a plot to murder the emperor. He brings the plan to light and gains recognition from Xerxes. Meanwhile, another man, Haman, is appointed to a position of authority in the court. It is the tradition of the kingdom that men in Haman's position can expect, even demand, that others would bow down to them. But Mordecai, being a faithful Jew, refuses to bow down to anyone save the God of Israel. Haman is offended, and in seeking revenge insists to Xerxes that there is a race of people in the empire who refuse to acknowledge the traditions and laws, whose constant position is dissent, and who are stirring up dissonance. These people, he contends, must be rooted out. Now Xerxes loves unity and figures this is a necessary thing. He signs the decree for the extermination of the Jewish population. Mordecai and others are understandably panicked and desperate. He approaches his niece and begs her to use her position to go to the king. It is the case that anyone, especially one from the harem, can lose their life if they go to the king without being called for. But Mordecai asks her to consider the risk. If you don't help, perhaps help will arise from another corner. But who knows? Perhaps you have come to this position of royal favor for just such a time as this. This story is often used to describe the nature of God's providence, that God can see before and attend to history and the lives of God's people. In its most simplistic understandings, God is seen to orchestrate events and circumstances, even bad ones, so that God can make good, or so that God's intentions can be realized or glorified. Now, there is nothing particularly troubling about the idea that there's nothing beyond God's redemption, nothing beyond the reach of the divine power of love. In fact, I'm quite fond of that idea. But too often, thinking about providence becomes a passive acceptance of what is, or a sense that something terrible was somehow meant to be. I really feel like you have to do some pretty convoluted theological and narrative reasoning to get that out of the book of Esther. Rather, I see it systems of injustice and numerous individuals claiming their agency in this story, even in places where they have little authority. There are reversals of fortune. The evil Haman is punished while Mordecai is lifted to a position of glory. This reversal is what is celebrated. But before all of that, we see that Vashti will not be objectified. Mordecai will not stand idly by when he could prevent an assassination. And Esther. Esther, who fears for her life, nevertheless fasts and prays and speaks out, saving the lives of countless people. If there is sacred and holy power in this story, it is in the willingness to take a risk for something important, something good. Where, I want to know, does that courage come from? I love this story, but I also envy Esther. I mean, not really. So many things about her life and situation in this story are deeply unappealing, but in this, at least, the call to action that Esther senses is clear. Her people are in danger, and she's got to talk to the king. That is what is going to help. What am I supposed to be doing when the lives of so many are in danger? What are we supposed to be doing? The systems which order our lives both empower and disempower us in ways that Esther could never imagine. I was thinking of the 2000 election cycle because it was just a year later that I started my MDiv and took public church, the course in which I was introduced to the Reinhold Niebuhr book from which Andy read. Though The Children of Light and the Children of Darkness was written at the end of the Second World War, it felt prescient to me in the aftermath of 9/11 and as our nation started to march toward war. Niebuhr wanted to vindicate democracy, but he also wanted to show how even democracies could give rise to totalitarianism. Liberals believed the best of humanity and were thus susceptible to those who didn't play fair, who had no ethics. The Nazi regime believed the worst of people and were not troubled by the use of political machinations to achieve their desired ends. Now note that Niebuhr was not talking about Republicans and Democrats. Totalitarian regimes were the children of darkness. But for me, in the wake of the 2000 election and in the years since, as I have tried to discern what work there is for me, for the church to do in the world, I have appreciated the way Niebuhr called my attention to the words of Jesus. Be wise as serpents, as innocent as doves. Try to understand what's going on. Don't be naive. Look at power dynamics and see who stands to gain in any given situation. Question those in authority and ask good questions. And do everything as ethically as you possibly can. Do no harm. As we lead up to the end of another critically important election, as we wait with anxiety, as we wonder what part each of us is called to play, as we speculate and plan and dream, what are you feeling called to be and do? What is your call in such a time as this? The writer and pastor Frederick Buechner described this tool for discernment. By and large, a good rule for finding out your call is this. The kind of work God usually calls you to is the kind of work that A, you need most to do, and B, that the world most needs to have done. Now, this is complicated by the fact that, you may have noticed this too, we are in the midst of a crisis, a pandemic the likes of which very few have ever seen. The death throes, we hope, of movements defined by their hatred. Money is tight for a lot of people, work is dangerous. Some are fearful for their lives, others for their marriages, some for our reproductive freedom. A friend of mine was amazed by finally feeling like she'd gotten something done for her job the other day, but then was devastated to find herself exhausted the next day, barely able to supervise her kids' digital schooling. What is the thing that I most need to do in the world? Some days it feels like keeping my family alive and going is the only thing I can do. A popular cartoon features a guy holding a balloon marked anxiety, with each frame offering another type of anxiety piling on. election anxiety, pandemic anxiety, climate change anxiety, existential anxiety itself. A lot of us are struggling. And yet, we are resilient. Sometimes we do a hard thing and it's exhausting, but we've done it and it was good. Sometimes we do a hard thing and it's exhausting, but sometimes it's energizing too. I understand this is supposed to be true about exercising. All of us are trying to do what we can with whatever gifts are at our disposal. We are trying to keep going. And friends, what I want to say to you is that that is holy work. In recent years, I've started to think that providence is less about God's intervention in particular moments or the lives of particular people, but rather in the invitation to all of us to participate in the holy work of creating the world in God's image. You don't have to save a whole group of people on your own, but you can offer yourself to do the work. And you can refuse to be resigned to the forces of death and injustice. You can refuse to accept the inevitability of suffering and evil. Now, friends, you are doing so much, and so I offer you this blessing. It's been making the rounds on social media this week, and I can't tell you how many times I listened to it over the past days, or what it meant to me to combine it with the images that you have provided of the ways that you've been keeping on, keeping hope alive, finding joy, seeking beauty, sharing love. May God bless you this week and always. Amen.
This is the keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going on song. This is the keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going on song.
This is the keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going on song.
I am Abigail, and this is Sean, and we're so glad that you've turned this on and welcomed us into your home, and you are welcome into our home. We're in Dayton, Ohio. We're in Sean's parents' house.
My parents' house.
Sean's parents' house. We were in Louisville when the shit hit, and we packed our 3-year-old into a car. We drove kind of far. We drove here, and we've been so lucky and blessed to be safely here. And we thought we'd be here for like 10 days, tops.
What did we know?
What did we know?
What
What did we know? We thought we knew a lot. We thought we knew a lot. Woo! Keep going on song. This is a keep going, keep going, keep going on. Keep going on song. This is a keep going, keep going, keep going on. Keep going on song. And we've been mostly healthy. We've been okay. Are you okay? Are you alright? Are you okay? Are you alright? Are you okay? I hope your body is whole tonight. And if your heart is breaking, I hope it's breaking open. And if your breath is shaking, I hope it's shaking through. And I hope that you've watched a lot of really great television, like a lot of it. And I hope that you find a hand lotion that actually makes your skin feel better. And I hope that you have enough to eat. I hope you're getting enough sleep, and I hope you have enough good company or enough good memory to last you a long time. Keep going, keep going, keep going on. Keep going on song. We sing the keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going on. Keep going on song. Let's bring some joy into the room, why not? We can try it, or some rage, and some grief and relief, fire that cleans my mind out and makes me ready to listen. I pray my pain is a river that flows to the ocean that connects my pain to yours. And I pray my happiness is like pollen that flies to you and pollinates your joy. Oh boy, is that possible? I don't know, we are making this up as we go. We have to make it up as we go. The keep going song, oh, we're making it up as we go. Keep going on, keep going on song. And I pray that when we meet again, that the world has changed into the world that we are imagining now together. And I pray that the world has become the world that we're planting inside of ourselves for each other and for our ancestors and for our kids. Ooh, and we're gonna start. This is a rough beginning. That's all I've got is a rough beginning to offer you. We're gonna start by singing some songs in this tiny space together. We're just gonna sing some songs for you, and we hope that when you hear them, you will feel a little bit less alone, and we will feel a little bit less alone in the work and in the hurt, and we will be together tonight somehow, whenever this is, wherever this is. We will be together tonight for the keep going on song. This is a keep going on. Keep going on song. This is a keep going on. Keep going on song. This is a keep going on. Keep going on song. This is a keep going on. Keep going on song. This is a keep going on. Keep going on song. This is a keep going on. Keep going on.
Thank you for joining us in worship this morning with the United Church of Gainesville. If you'd like to find out more about our congregation or our work, you can check us out at our website, www.ucgainesville.org.